the Russians have an intense interest in our supply chains, in our military capability, and the sort of political and military support that we're giving to Ukraine. And they're seeking to disrupt that and obviously discredit it. You've only got to go on Twitter or some of the social media platforms right now, and you've got hundreds, perhaps thousands of Russian bots trying to discredit what we're doing with Ukraine.
How common are Russian spies in the UK?
Well, they're active all the time. I mean, just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. And the Russians are subjected in the UK to a massive intelligence operation, not just because they are naturally acquisitive for this sort of information. They like to interfere in our democratic ways of life. And of course, they see us as key belligerents in supporting Ukraine against them in the war that's going on at the moment. So we are absolutely in the front line of their intelligence and espionage efforts. We have been for some time. I mean, it's, I'm afraid, the nature of totalitarian regimes that they do this sort of thing. And if we think Russia's bad, we've got Iran and China doing it as well.
They like to interfere in our democratic way of life. And, you know, you mentioned the war there in Ukraine. Do you think this has been happening more so since February 2022?
Oh, almost certainly. I mean, the Russians have an intense interest in our supply chains, in our military capability, and the sort of political and military support that we're giving to Ukraine. And they're seeking to disrupt that and obviously discredit it. You've only got to go on Twitter or some of the social media platforms right now, and you've got hundreds, perhaps thousands of Russian bots trying to discredit what we're doing with Ukraine.
And again, speaking generally, Chris, would it be common for Russian spies from any of the states that you mentioned to live very normal lives? And I suppose I describe normal as living as
like you and me.
Like you and me in a suburban environment, going to work, having another job, and getting on with the neighbours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a well-known tenet of especially Marxist-Leninist regimes and their successor regimes that they employ sleepers and also fellow travellers, fifth columnists. I mean, there are people in this country who actively support what the Russians and Chinese are trying to achieve. Goodness knows why, but they do. And in our universities, in our industries, in our communities, they exist. They are there. They're paid for by the Russian and Chinese regimes. And obviously they're paid by their results.
And some people can lay inactive in these cells for years
sleepers.
on end. Sleepers, yeah.
And, you know, we've seen, actually, it's the more clumsy ones that we get to hear about, the ones that actually haven't covered their traces very well, the ones that try to chat up MPs and things like that. So we get to hear about those. But, you know, our security services are on the case, MI5, MI6, and obviously Special Branch are after them all the time. I'm afraid to say that by and large, the penalties are so light that people are encouraged to do this sort of thing, both from within our communities, but also from, as in this case, Bulgarians from the European Union.
Well, when you say the penalties are so light, Chris, what do you mean? Is that because often the charges, again, generally, that people are given in circumstances like this don't really cover the extent to which of crimes to which they can be committing?
Well, it's very difficult to determine the damage they've done. That's the first thing. So when you come to court, it's very difficult to say, well, actually, this is the impact. So that's the first thing. And secondly, generally in this area, people end up getting deported at the end of it. And of course, they go home as heroes if they come from the countries which are conducting the espionage. But, you know, I mean, in wartime, it used to be a sort of capital punishment offence to be engaged in espionage against this country, and we've come a long way from that. And of course, we don't want to do that. But dare I say it, when you turn up in Salisbury and you put nerve agent on the ground and you just go back to Russia and joke about it, there's no consequence. And we have to tighten up, I think, the way in which we both try and detect these people, and also we're able to sort of put in place some deterrent options, both for the regime and for the individuals concerned.
Yeah, you're obviously talking about the former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury in Wiltshire, and the deadly nerve agent Novichok, and they're now of course well, they're hidden, aren't they now? So
Well, the
for their
basic problem
safety.
is, Rick, in our free societies, they're allowed to roam free because of the surveillance societies that exist in Russia, China, Iran, and places like that. You can't get away with a lot of this activity, and so we're very vulnerable because of our freedoms, because of our democratic ideals. And it's only when we have a state of emergency or a war that we
Yeah.
can actually tighten up.
So, Chris, are you saying that basically the law needs to be tightened up and potentially new laws need to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in the long, calm lee. I think, as a naval officer, I would say that the long, calm lee of the peace dividend after the Cold War. We have not realised, I think, as a country or as a political class, that we are in strategic competition with totalitarian regimes like Russia, China, and Iran, and what the consequences of that are. I mean, I'm often in Cambridge, and until recently, Chinese influence there was huge, both in terms of investment, surveillance, and all the other forms of influence as well. And it's taken a long time for this country to wake up to the threat from these totalitarian regimes.